If you're anything like me, you've probably have come across videos on YouTube that are titled disturbing videos on YouTube or disturbing videos with backstories or something like that. And back in 2016, there was a video that started to go viral that was posted back in 2009 titled "Hi Walter, I got a new girlfriend today." If you haven't seen this video, it's kind of weird. There's already like an edgy, uncanny creepiness of this video. This guy kind of looks like what I would describe as a Reddit mod or a basement dweller. He just looks like your typical kidnapping kind of guy. And in this video, he goes on about how he met this girl and she's just so wonderful, and how they went to the mall and they were trying on some clothes and she's just so amazing. He's talking to the camera, he's talking to Walter, and he wants Walter to meet this girl, but he goes on about how she is extremely camera shy. So the video shows this guy getting up and going over to a door and opening it up. It reveals a woman who is naked and tied up on all fours on the floor. Now, you don't really see anything of her. It's already a little bit of a blurry video. It's posted back in 2009, but this girl is clearly not there on her own will. She is crying and begging to be free. She wants to go home. It's very obvious this guy has kidnapped this girl. But when this video went viral, a lot of people started to notice how this girl looked like Kayla Berg, who was a 15-year-old girl that went missing back in 2009. The video went so viral that people were making so many videos analyzing this specific video about how this girl had to be Kayla Berg. Eventually, this video would make its way to the police, where the police would have to analyze this video to make sure it wasn't Kayla. Of course, they were able to confirm that this video was in fact staged and probably was just like an art piece. Even the own creators of this video were getting harassed, which was not okay. And so the police had to make a statement saying this isn't Kayla. To this very day, Kayla has never been found. And today, we're going to talk about what we know and what we think might have happened to Kayla. But first, let me introduce you to the podcast, The Decomposing Flower. I'm your host, Jen. With me is Kira. In this podcast, we talk about all sorts of things, whether it's true crime or true crime adjacent or anything that we find interesting. If you do have a case or topic you would like us to discuss, feel free to leave it in the comments. We also have a form that you can fill in. All of the information is found online. We don't speak for anyone that has been affected or involved in this case. It's just shared for educational purposes. And I mean no harm to Kayla's friends and family. If I do get any information wrong, though, and you want to correct me or you feel like you just want to join in on the discussion, feel free to in the comments below. We do enjoy reading your guys' comments. But, anyways, let's talk a little bit about Kayla. So, Kayla was known for her kindness. She was just this like really sweet and kind girl. She was really fun and she kind of was a little bit of an overachiever. She was really into becoming like a gymnast when she was a lot younger. But of course, like most teenagers, when she got to high school, she just started to care a lot more about, hanging out with her friends and maybe doing things that 15-year-olds shouldn't be doing. And her grades did start to kind of flunk. And she was just wanting to spend a lot more time partying than going to school. When Kayla was, around 2 or 3, her parents did separate. Now, they were never legally married, but they did go and live in separate homes. But it seemed like they were still on really good terms. Kayla and her brother were allowed to go to their mom's house or to their dad's. It was never really strict. And when Kayla was a teenager, she kind of would use this a little bit to her advantage. So, instead of telling her mom that she was going to be hanging out with her friends, she might tell her mom that she was with her dad, or she would tell her dad that she's with her mom. In reality, it was most likely because she was just wanting to go and hang out with her friends and do things that your parents probably wouldn't want you to be doing. So, Kayla's mom, Hope, was really wanting Kayla to get back on track and kind of start a new life. At the time, they were living in Wisconsin, and I believe that Hope, Kayla's mom, had lived in Texas for majority of her life, and there was a lot more opportunities there than there was in Antigo, Wisconsin. And I'm sorry if I said that name wrong, but Hope had heard from her own friends that, maybe it would be better for Kayla to go to Texas. There's just a lot more opportunities. So Kayla and Hope packed up and they ended up moving to Texas, but only for a few months because unfortunately, James would be diagnosed with cancer. And Kayla was wanting to spend time with her dad because she didn't know how long he had. Of course, Hope wasn't going to withhold her daughter from her dad, so they both agreed to move back to Wisconsin. Now, at the time, Kayla and her mom, they didn't actually have a place to live. So while they were in the process of getting their own place, Kayla would go and live with her grandparents or her dad, or she would spend time with her friends, and Hope would go and live with some friends while they were just getting ready. So it was very common for Kayla to be spending a lot more time with her friends and kind of just be off doing her own thing. It wasn't really unheard of that Kayla wasn't always home that much. Kayla was spending a lot more time with her friends and also her boyfriend, Miguel, who was 19 and Kayla was 15. So definitely an age gap there. I don't know why a 19-year-old is dating a 15-year-old. From what I could tell, Hope was opposing of this relationship. I believe that she tried to get Kayla to break up with him. It seemed like Kayla and Miguel were on and off again, although I don't know if they were really breaking up all the time or if Kayla was kind of, she wanted to be with Miguel, but she knew her mom didn't want her to be with him. I'm not too sure there, but she was spending a lot more time with guys that were a lot older, and just her and her friends were a little bit more into doing what like typical teenagers do, drinking and having fun when they should probably be focusing more on school and not drinking and stuff like that. Unfortunately, with this case, there has been a lot of opinions regarding Kayla. From what I could tell, Kayla kind of comes across a little bit like that teenage girl where maybe she just didn't care too much about what her mom had said and was wanting to do what she wanted to do and hang out with her friends and smoke weed, kind of what your average teenager wants to do. I had friends like this growing up where, their parents would tell them that they weren't allowed to do it and they just didn't care. And sometimes that could just be you're just a teenager, but Kayla was also in this weird place of she didn't really have her own house, and so probably hanging out with her friends and just doing that was a lot more appealing than living with her grandparents. It's just like a normal teenage girl thing to do. So there was this one day where Kayla had asked her mom if she could spend the night at Natasha's house, who was her friend, and that she would come back probably the next day. She was going to go see her dad the following day, I believe. But the following day, Kayla never came home. And Hope found this kind of weird. Now, Kayla did not have a phone, so Hope couldn't call Kayla to be like, hey, where are you? No one has heard from you. So she ended up calling Natasha's house to be like, "Hey, is Kayla still there?" And Natasha's mom was like, "Wait a minute. Natasha said that she was going to be with Kayla at your house." And that's when these moms realized that they had been tricked. Their daughters pretty much just lied and tricked them with the oldest little trick in the book. And so they were kind of waiting a bit, I believe, like just to see if they would show up because maybe they were at the mall or doing something. But as the hours passed, they were not hearing from them. That's when Hope decided to go and make a missing persons report because obviously she's not hearing from her daughter. But literally, as she's like filling in this report, she gets a hold of Kayla, and Kayla and Natasha say they just lost track of time. So, what actually had happened was both of these girls lied to their moms because they wanted to go to a party where there would be drinking and older boys, which obviously their moms would have been very against because, they're both 15-year-old girls. So, of course, once Hope got a hold of Kayla and she found out she was fine, she relaxed and she wasn't really mad. She was just happy that her daughter was back. And she basically just said, please don't do that again. But then it would happen again. But this time, Kayla would never be found. So the following day, Kayla was spending the day with her dad, James, and just kind of hanging out with him. And around 8:45 p.m., Kayla got picked up by her brother's older friend, Kevin, who was a lot older than Kayla. He was 24 or 23 and she was 15. So there definitely was a big age gap there, but he was someone who had been in their life for as long as they could remember. He was a very close family friend. So it wasn't just like some older guy hanging out with Kayla, even though I still find it a little bit odd that a guy that age is hanging out with a minor by himself. That's very weird, I will say. But it didn't really ring any bells to the parents because they had known Kevin. It seemed like what they were gonna do is just kinda hang around and go driving. And so the last time Kayla was actually ever seen was at 9:30 PM that night. Kayla had stopped at McDonald's to go and see her friend Beth. Kevin stayed in the car while Kayla went and chatted with Beth. Kayla had just told Beth that she was just driving around with Kevin and that they were smoking some weed and that she would call Beth after her shift. But later that night, Beth never got that call from Kayla, and I'm assuming that she probably thought that Kayla was just, maybe still hanging out with Kevin, or maybe she went and hung out with another friend, or maybe she went home and fell asleep. So on August 12th, the following day, James realized that Kayla had never came home. And he was really worried about this. Now, he did have cancer, and I'm assuming that maybe he was on a lot of medication, maybe he was really tired and weak, and maybe he fell asleep before he assumed that Kayla would be back. But like I said, Kayla was known to, maybe go to her mom's or go to her dad's or hang out with some friends. So it wasn't that odd that Kayla didn't come home. But later that day, James ended up calling Kevin and asking Kevin if he knew where Kayla was, and he said no, that he didn't really remember where he dropped her off. He just knows that it was at a friend's house. So James ends up calling Hope to say that he hasn't seen Kayla and asking if maybe she knows where Kayla is. Hope, of course, had just gone through this, so she's probably thinking, of course, maybe Kayla's just off doing what Kayla does. So she ended up chatting with some of Kayla's friends for some information, but nobody knew where Kayla was. Again, Kayla had no phone, so they couldn't even call her. So Hope ended up calling Kevin, but he never answered his phone. Eventually, he did get back to her through a text message saying that his phone had died, but he didn't really remember where he dropped Kayla off. All he knows is that it was in Wausau, which is just a little bit away from where they were living. So, this is where the case gets a little bit controversial, where people get a little bit frustrated. Is it took Hope around 5 to 6 days to finally make a missing persons report. Now, she has said that she regrets this and feels extremely guilty for this. I feel like maybe potentially Hope was thinking that Kayla had just done this a few days ago. Maybe she was off hanging out with some friends. Maybe she was acting out because her dad had cancer and she didn't know how to cope with it. I'm not too sure why she didn't really make the missing persons report. I mean, she had already just done a missing persons report and Kayla showed up, so maybe she was thinking that Kayla was going to show up, but eventually when she never did, Hope finally did make a missing persons report. Now, at first, Kayla was only listed as an endangered runaway, probably because she was that type of girl where she was always off doing things. Unfortunately, this is something that does happen to a lot of teenagers that are what society would probably call like trouble or the bad kid or disrespectful. They probably thought that Kayla was just off doing whatever. But eventually, when nothing was showing up and Kayla wasn't coming around, that's when the police actually took this serious. They ended up questioning Kevin because he was the last person to see Kayla, and he would actually tell the investigators that he had dropped Kayla off at Miguel's house, who, was Kayla's ex boyfriend. But things were kind of already raising some red flags. First of all, Kevin's story wasn't adding up. He had mentioned that he didn't know where he dropped her off. Then he mentioned that it was Wausau. Then he mentioned it was at Miguel's house. But also, the house that he said was Miguel's house was Miguel's old house. He didn't live there anymore. And Kayla knew that. Kayla had already been to Miguel's new home. So why would she have Kevin drop her off at some random house that her ex-boyfriend or boyfriend didn't live at? So it didn't really make any sense. So the police decided to go and check Kevin's phone, and they noticed that his phone had been turned off the entire night. So there was no data to show that he was ever in Wausau. So as we know, we don't even know if Kayla ever even went to Wausau or if she was still just in Antigua. So it wasn't until October of 2009, so a few months later, when the police were pretty certain that Kevin either did something to Kayla or he knew what happened to Kayla. Because for all we know, Kayla could have told Kevin that she was going somewhere and maybe she didn't want her parents to know. So maybe she told Kevin, don't let my parents know. So the police were like, Kevin has to know something. So they ended up charging him with second degree reckless endangerment of a minor. And then they would search his home, which he actually lived with his parents at the time. And he had an alibi. His parents said that he was home that night. So they ended up also searching his car and they went through his phone and they started to hound him with more questions. The more questions they kept asking, that's when Kevin finally ended up getting a lawyer. Having a lawyer is not a bad thing. Of course, you probably do want to have a lawyer, especially if you're innocent. But of course, the police, they found it kind of odd that the more questions, he finally was like, I want a lawyer. So the police were kind of hoping that the more questions that they had, or if they had him charged with something, would have had Kevin finally break and tell them where Kayla was, but he never did. He actually would plead not guilty, and his charges were later dismissed because they didn't have enough evidence to show that anything led him to Kayla. So the police ended up having to go to another suspect, which was Miguel. Miguel's phone did ping that night where Kayla supposedly was, but they didn't have really any other leads. The only thing that they really had was that he was kind of suspicious, but that's it. Being suspicious is not enough to have someone be put behind bars. Hope did say she found him really odd because he didn't reach out to the family, and when they were doing these like search parties, he didn't join. And she just found it kind of odd because she was like, he was dating her for a little bit, so it was just like really weird that he didn't care. But other than that, they really had nothing and no leads to Kayla. In March of 2010, they ended up having the National Guard do a soil disruption, and they used a helicopter to search Kevin's house and also his workplace because he worked at a potato farm. They even called in dogs to see if they could sniff any human remains, but nothing was leading to Kayla. In July of that year, CNN had an episode that featured Kayla on Find Our Children, giving her case a lot more attention, but still, there was nothing that led them to Kayla. Unfortunately, in 2011, James would actually die from cancer, and if Kayla is still alive, she was never able to say goodbye to her dad. So the case pretty much went cold until 2016 when that video, Hi Walter, would go viral. Obviously, like I said, the police were able to confirm that the video is fake, that it was just a staged video, and that the actors are just actors and they have nothing to do with this. Hope did say that this video kind of traumatizing for her because, the idea that Kayla could be kidnapped is something that probably did come across her mind because, Kayla was a young girl and that's not unheard of. She did say it, at least with this video, more people were aware of Kayla and there was more attention, more eyes in case, Kayla does show up somewhere. So, really, the only final lead they ever really had was in December of 2023. There was this inmate from the Wisconsin State Prison who gave a tip to the police that led them to a county that was 100 miles away from where Kayla supposedly was, but it led them to nothing. It's really unsure if this person was just, bored or wanting attention, but Hope did say that this was something that really upset her because while she's still looking for her daughter, she has to also worry about people lying for, attention or clout or something like that. But of course, Kayla has never been found. Hope says that the only reason she hasn't given up on finding Kayla is because there has been no DNA found of Kayla being deceased or anything. It's almost like Kayla literally vanished in thin air and she just wants to find the truth. Hope's life has continued to move forward. She is a grandma now, but of course, she will never stop fighting and looking for her daughter, Kayla. And she just wants justice for Kayla. So there are a few theories, and again, these are just theories, these are not factual. So Hope does theorize that maybe Kevin gave Kayla drugs and she potentially overdosed. And maybe Kevin panicked and didn't want anyone to know because it is really suspicious that his phone was turned off the entire time, but we'll never know. Other theories are that maybe Kevin did drop Kayla off and she met up with someone else and someone else drove and picked her up and took her somewhere. Or maybe she got lost and was walking in the woods. Or some people also theorize that maybe Kevin made advances on Kayla and that she rejected him and in his anger he killed her. But again, these are all theories and we'll never really know what happened to Kayla. I'm curious to know what everyone else's opinion is on this case and what your theories might be. It's really hard to know. Sometimes the truth is a lot more simple than what we think. It could be as simple as Kayla went walking off into the woods and she got lost. Like that has happened to so many people. So it's really hard to know. But again, just remember she's a real person, and even though we get to turn off this episode, for Kayla's friends and family, this is something that still haunts them. So just remember to be respectful when you are talking about Kayla. She's not just like a character on a show. But that's all we really have for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Again, we meant no harm to anyone affected by this case or to Kayla's friends or her family. And I hope I explained with as much factual information and empathy as I could. And we will see you guys next week. Bye.